The applause echoed through the room so loudly that I almost forgot how to breathe. My father stood at the front of the family gathering with a polished wooden box in his hands, smiling as though he were about to perform the proudest act of his life. My mother wiped away happy tears while relatives crowded closer, eager to witness the moment. Then, my younger sister, Emily, stepped forward with that familiar, confident grin I'd seen my entire life. Dad opened the box, lifted the brass keys to our family's lake house, and placed them gently into her hands. Everyone erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed. Hugs followed. Emily turned toward me, and for just a second, her lips curled into a smile that wasn't joyful at all. It was triumphant, the kind of smile that said, "I won again." In that instant, I realized this wasn't about property. It was the final chapter of 25 years of being overlooked. My name is Hannah. I'm 35 years old, and growing up in my family meant learning that love wasn't always given equally. Emily was 4 years younger than me, but somehow every milestone in her life became a family celebration. When she earned average grades, my parents called her gifted. When I graduated at the top of my class, they simply nodded and said, "That's what we expected from you." If Emily forgot a responsibility, she was told everyone makes mistakes. If I forgot one, I was reminded to be more responsible. At first, I believed if I worked harder, eventually my parents would notice me. Instead, the harder I worked, the more invisible I became. By the time I graduated from college with honors, I'd already accepted that my accomplishments belonged only to me. I earned scholarships, worked late-night shifts, and paid off my student loans without asking anyone for help. Meanwhile, Emily changed careers every year. She wanted to be a photographer, then a travel blogger, then an interior designer. Each new dream was funded by my parents without hesitation. Whenever she failed, they called it finding herself. Whenever I succeeded, they acted as though success had simply been expected. The only person who ever acknowledged the imbalance was my grandfather, Arthur. He never criticized my parents directly, but he watched everything. During family gatherings, he'd quietly sit beside me on the porch, overlooking the lake, and tell me stories about resilience. "People think life rewards talent," he'd say with a smile. "It doesn't. It rewards character. Character always takes longer, but it lasts forever." One summer, when I was 16, Grandpa noticed me sitting alone on the dock after Emily had once again received praise for something I'd actually helped her finish. He sat beside me without saying a word for several minutes. Finally, he handed me an old fishing lure and said, "You know why this is valuable? Not because it's shiny, because it's survived thousands of casts without breaking. That's what real strength looks like." I kept that lure for years. Whenever life felt unfair, I'd hold it in my hand and remember his words. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. Years later, those words would change everything. The lake house had belonged to Grandpa Arthur for more than 40 years. It wasn't a mansion, but it was beautiful. Every summer, our entire family gathered there to fish, barbecue, and watch sunsets over the water. Grandpa built the dock with his own hands. He planted every tree surrounding the property. To him, the house wasn't expensive real estate. It was a place where memories lived. When he passed away at 83, the entire family mourned. During the funeral, everyone talked about preserving his legacy. I assumed the house would remain shared property, a place where future generations could gather. I never imagined ownership would become a competition. 3 months later, my parents invited everyone back to the lake house. Dad announced there was an important family decision to make. The atmosphere felt strangely festive. Tables overflowed with food. Emily wore a bright white dress as if she were attending a celebration instead of a meeting. My cousins whispered excitedly. I noticed a small wooden box sitting beside my father, but thought nothing of it. After everyone finished eating, Dad stood up and cleared his throat. Your mother and I have decided who should take responsibility for the lake house. He opened the box. Inside rested Grandpa's old brass keys. My stomach tightened. Dad smiled proudly at Emily. We believe this home belongs with you. Applause filled the room. Mom hugged Emily tightly while relatives congratulated her. Someone opened a bottle of champagne. My aunt actually started crying from happiness. I remained seated. No one noticed. Or perhaps they chose not to. Emily accepted the keys dramatically before turning toward me. There it was again. That smile. The same expression she'd worn after every Christmas when she'd received more presents than I had. The same smile after every birthday when our parents somehow made her day feel bigger than mine. I looked away. Not because I wanted the house, because I suddenly understood I'd never truly belonged in my own family. Just as everyone prepared to celebrate, another voice interrupted. I believe we're not quite finished. The room fell silent. Standing near the doorway was an older man wearing a gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase. I recognized him immediately. Mr. Collins, Grandpa Arthur's attorney. Dad frowned. What are you doing here? Mr. Collins smiled politely. I'm simply following your father's final instructions. Confused murmurs spread throughout the room. He placed his briefcase on the dining table and removed a sealed envelope. Across the front, written in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "Open only after a decision has been made." Suddenly, nobody looked comfortable anymore. Mr. Collins carefully opened the envelope. I'll read this exactly as your father instructed. The room became completely silent. If you're hearing these words, then my family has already decided who deserves my home. Before anything else, I want every person in this room to understand one thing. A house is never just wood and stone. It's a reflection of the people trusted to protect it. My father's confident smile slowly faded. Mr. Collins continued. I've watched my grandchildren grow into adults. One learned responsibility by carrying burdens without complaint. The other learned to expect someone else would always rescue her. Emily's face stiffened. Mom shifted nervously. Dad folded his arms. Then came the sentence that changed everything. I prepared a legally binding trust years ago because I feared emotion would cloud judgment after I was gone. Mr. Collins removed another folder from his briefcase. This document supersedes every informal family decision. Emily frowned. What does that even mean? Mr. Collins looked directly at her. It means ownership has already been decided. The room froze. He turned toward me. Hannah Mitchell, according to Mr. Arthur Mitchell's final trust, you are the sole legal owner of the lake house. Silence. Real silence. Nobody moved. Emily stared at me as though I'd somehow planned the entire thing. Dad looked completely shocked. Mom whispered, "That can't be right." Mr. Collins calmly slid the documents across the table. "It is!" Emily slammed the keys onto the table. "This is ridiculous!" She turned toward Dad. "Tell him he's wrong." But Dad couldn't, because every signature, every document, Every legal requirement had already been completed years earlier. Grandpa had anticipated exactly what might happen. He simply refused to let favoritism decide his legacy. Mr. Collins unfolded the second page. Arthur asked me to continue reading. He adjusted his glasses. Hannah never demanded recognition. She never measured love by gifts or money. She quietly carried responsibilities that many adults twice her age couldn't handle. While others expected life to reward them, she worked without expecting applause. I felt tears sting my eyes, not because of the property, because someone had finally seen me. Someone had noticed every invisible sacrifice. The letter wasn't finished. To my son, Daniel, and my daughter-in-law, Karen. Dad slowly lowered his head. If you're listening, then I hope you'll hear this with an open heart. Loving one child more loudly than another creates wounds that don't disappear when children become adults. The forgotten child remembers every overlooked birthday, every dismissed achievement, every comparison. Mom covered her mouth. Several relatives looked down at the floor. Nobody argued, because everyone knew Grandpa was telling the truth. He continued, I don't blame Emily. Children simply accept the love they're given. But parents choose fairness, and too often, you chose comfort instead. Emily looked as though she'd been slapped. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the center of admiration. She was forced to see herself through someone else's eyes. Grandpa's final paragraph nearly broke me. Hannah, if you're hearing this, understand that this house isn't my reward to you. Your reward came years ago through your honesty, discipline, and strength. This home is simply my way of protecting something I know you'll preserve with love. Never confuse inheritance with worth. You proved your worth long before today. Mr. Collins folded the letter. No one spoke. Emily suddenly burst into tears, not loud, dramatic tears, real ones. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear, I didn't know. For the first time in years, I believed her. Because this wasn't really about her. It was about parents who had unknowingly taught one daughter she deserved everything and taught the other she should expect nothing. Dad slowly walked toward me. I don't know what to say. I looked at him quietly. Neither do I. Mom reached for my hand. I'm sorry. Those two words carried decades of regret, but they couldn't erase decades of silence. Over the following weeks, things changed in ways I never expected. Dad began calling just to ask how I was doing. Mom invited me to lunch without making Emily the center of every conversation. One evening, Dad admitted something that shocked me. I spent years convincing myself I was treating you both the same, he said. Looking back, I see hundreds of moments where I failed you. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest. Emily also began changing. She got her first full-time job without asking Mom and Dad for money. She rented a small apartment instead of expecting them to buy her one. One afternoon, she showed up at the lake house carrying a toolbox. I figured you could use some help fixing the deck, she said awkwardly. We spent the entire weekend sanding wood, replacing old boards, and repainting the railing. For the first time since we were children, we laughed together. Not because everything had been forgotten, because we were finally building something instead of competing over it. The following summer, I hosted a family reunion at the lake house. Before dinner, I gathered everyone on the porch. This house isn't valuable because Grandpa left it to me, I said. It's valuable because this is where he taught us what family should look like. I don't want this place to remind us of favoritism anymore. I want it to remind us that it's never too late to become better people. Nobody applauded. Nobody needed to. Dad hugged me tightly. Mom whispered another apology. Emily smiled. Not the victorious smile I'd known all my life, but a genuine one. As the sun disappeared behind the lake, I realized Grandpa had been right. Life doesn't always reward the loudest person in the room. It rewards the one who quietly keeps showing up with honesty, patience, and character. The lake house became mine that day. But the greatest inheritance Grandpa left me wasn't a set of keys. It was finally being seen.